It's still showing their face. It's small, but maybe their own infrastructure.
Yeah, that's right.
They don't have the same pressures.
Well, just a sec. You mean in terms of water and sewer? Because they just, somebody,
No carriages.
no carriages, yeah. Sorry, I'm stupid in front chair.
What's that?
I want to get a free chair.
Free what?
Chair. Remember I was talking about
Oh, yes. Did you get one?
Yeah.
Buy one?
And my buddy dropped it and I'm like dragging it. It says 2-person carry. The thing weighed like 80 pounds. It was in a big box. Like pushing on the ferry the whole.
Oh, no.
This big. I was asking about office chairs because I didn't find. So a friend of mine got me this free one in a box. It was like 80 pounds. And it was on foot. And I had this curtain around the ferry.
Yeah, we were always told me.
So it's 6:01. If you guys want to get started, I'm happy to start. Thank you to members of the public who turned up tonight and to anybody who's live streaming in or participating by Zoom. I'd like to welcome you to our 2022 budget open house. So I have a few slides that I put together just to provide some more context and information about the budget for you. So I will just start sharing those. Oh, yes, go ahead. Sorry. The right screen, okay. And should be on this. I don't know what's happening here. There we go. How's that? So, for tonight's presentation, I'm going to come and take it back a little. I'm going to focus a little bit more on council and their strategic priorities and talk a little bit about how those priorities of council are showing up in the budget. All council's strategic priorities can be found in Island Plan 2022. First strategic priority that council has communicated this year is strategic priority A1 under the heading of self-reliance, and that's about advancing housing initiatives. So many of the priorities that council has articulated in the island plan this year are actually addressed in the work of the planning department, and they form part of regular operational expenditures. So for example, coming forward on the next council meeting agenda is addressing the secondary suites bylaw and taking a look at the minimum lot size. All of those types of bylaw work is reflected in the just general ongoing work of the planning department. Recently, earlier this year, council did a call for an expression of interest for housing in Area 2, Lot 1. So right now, staff are in the process of reviewing and assessing those proposals that were received. Other ways that council is addressing their advancement of housing initiatives is to demonstrate support to organizations that are advancing diverse housing initiatives. So that would include Birch Society and Snug Cove House, and providing any assistance from a municipal perspective that can be provided to support those applications, those funding applications to BC Housing. Additionally, council has established a mechanism to accumulate funds to support affordable housing through the establishment of the Housing Reserve Fund. Now, there's no funding in there at the moment, but it is there in order to collect and accumulate funds that may be provided through ways of developments that go forward that wish to make a contribution to a housing reserve fund. The next one, of course, is the advancement of council's major capital projects, and that's under the heading of self-reliance, and it's priority A2. Certainly, and most obvious to everyone is the construction of the community center. It's an $18 million construction project, and it just began in February. It's expected to complete in the fall of 2023. And this project will require a significant amount of senior staff time to oversee this project. It's going to be requiring resources from community rec, from public works, parks, environment, and as well as the CAO's office and myself, because we need to make sure that this project is delivered on time and on budget. Secondly is the completion of the Bowen Island Fire Hall, the replacement fire hall. This is a $3.7 million construction project. It began in 2021, and it will be complete within a couple of months. And this brings to completion one of Council's most important strategic priorities that has been included in every single island plan since they first started publishing. There's only nominal incremental operating expenses included in the 2022 financial plan because it's not anticipated that we will be continuing to operate the old fire hall. And a word on the old fire hall. At the moment, Council is considering alternative uses and options for this property, because once the new fire hall is up and running, it will be closed and it will be empty at the end of the summer. Next major capital project is to continue work on the multi-use path. And at the moment, we are working on the segment from Cardina Road to Bix. The budget includes a $419,000 provision for this work. And this stretch of the multi-use path is 100% grant funded through a federal ICIP grant program. Next major capital project hasn't started yet, but is to start working on the on-island composting facility. It's planned to be located behind Bird. We have received approval for a grant funding for this project of just over $1 million. So our municipal share for this project is $509,000. It is expected that we will use short-term borrowing to provide our share of the funding for this, and that we would repay those funds over the next 5 years, starting next year in 2023. Now, this grant requires that this project be started by October 2022. The next Council strategic priority under the resilience heading is to strengthen infrastructure and ecosystems. This is their priority B1. All of the water systems this year have adopted user rates. Well, 6 of 7 water systems have adopted user rates that are metered rates. So they're consumption-based billing. And that is intended to promote the conservation of the resource through the use of metered utility rates. All of the metered system rates at the moment are under review, and the goal is to gradually shift more of the collection from the flat rate part of the model to the metered rate part. So we did have this discussion with all of the LAC meetings at our meetings in March, and by far there were a significant interest from most of the LACs to move more towards a consumption-based billing system. Next, under the strengthening infrastructure and ecosystems, I've included the $1.6 million project for Snood Cove wastewater treatment plant. And this will increase the capacity of the plant to handle the current demand. $718,677 of this project has been allocated to and will be paid for directly by the sewer local service area property owners. And they will be paying for this project with a parcel tax and additional user fees to repay funds to the general fund over the next 7 years. The remainder, $921,323, is the cost that has been attributable to projects which advance the Council's strategic priorities, and that amount is to be paid for from municipal reserves. The next strategic commitment articulated by Council is to address urgent water management and infrastructure issues. This is under priority B3. This is a project that has just come up. It's the Trunk Road Stormwater Upgrade Project. It has it's in its very early stages at the moment. It has an estimated cost of about $1.5 million. And this is to address the storm sewers that run along the length of Bowen Island Trunk Road on both sides. And they divert the water from the street and they outfall it to the ocean. But the construction of the multi-use path from Cardina to Bix, it unearthed corroded and disintegrating infrastructure under the ground. See in the photo there what the culverts look like underneath the multi-use path there. So on the south side of Trunk Road, it was evident to us over the Christmas period that sinkholes have started to develop in the pavement where the disintegrating culverts underneath has allowed the pavement on top to collapse. So if you go, that is a stretch in front of the pharmacy on Bowen Island Trunk Road, where there are holes that have appeared, and underneath are more of those disintegrating culverts, and the pavement on top has collapsed. So there is provision in the 2022 budget for the cost of this project. We are very early estimates are about 1.5 million, and it's an urgent high-risk project, and it was only recently discovered through the construction of that multi-use path. So the funding source for this project is a combination of TransLink grant funds that we receive in support of our section of the municipal road network. So Trunk Road is considered part of TransLink's across the region municipal roads network, and we receive funding annually to help support that. Not much, about 60,000, which doesn't go a long way to address a $1.9 million project. But we have been saving it for a couple of years. So we have, I believe we have about $200,000 saved to use towards that project. We have community works grant funding of about $240,000. So the rest of it then will have to come from our own reserves. So about 1/3 funded from those grants and about 2/3 from our reserves. That recent discovery of this project is another one of the projects that is placing added pressure on our municipal reserves this year. So I'll talk a little bit about our reserves. We set aside money in reserve funds and we accumulate those savings for future needs. And reserves, there's two kinds. They can be statutory, which mean they're established by bylaw, or they can be non-statutory, which means they just kind of form part of our accumulated operating surplus. And that just means, accumulated operating surplus just means that it's residual cash, and it's usually derived from an excess of revenue over expenses that is built up over a course of several years. And we use that as a source of cash flow. It pays our operating expenses during the first half of the year because we don't collect our property taxes until July. So we use that and it's available to fund one-time, extraordinary, non-recurring expenses. Our statutory reserves are dedicated contributions to or from these bylaw established funds, and they're approved specifically in the 5-year financial plan bylaw. So the municipality makes dedicated contributions to these reserve funds each year. So here in this graph, you can see what the expected closing balance of our municipal statutory reserve funds are expected to be over the next 5 years. And you can see how those levels are expected to remain flat for the first 2 years. And then the plan is to actively work to replenish those balances in years 3 to 5. But with those significant capital expenditures that we have, we're just not able to grow those in the first 2 years of the plan. We are going to be making a couple of contributions to non-statutory reserves, and you'll see the impact of the 5-year financial plan balance on the non-statutory reserves. And that's to increase over the first 2 years and then level off and remain relatively stable in the final 3 years. So the contributions, recommending that the contributions be made to the non-statutory reserve funds in 2022 and 2023, And this is to provide council with the flexibility to use the funds in multiple different ways. Perhaps if they're needed to close the gap on the funding plan for the community center, or they could be used for the municipal contribution to the organic composting project if not needed for that. And this would reduce the short-term borrowing requirement and provide less exposure to short-term interest rate risks in the following years, 2023 to 2027. Getting back to council priorities, looking at strengthening infrastructure and ecosystems, there is included in the financial plan a proposed Eagle Cliff Cove Bay connection. And this project contemplates construction of an interconnection between the two systems, upgrading the high zone reservoir and connecting those properties that are located between the two water systems in the Scarborough area. The total estimated cost of this project is $4.8 million. And we have submitted a grant application on behalf of this project, and it could contribute up to $3.5 million of this project. And this is to guarantee in perpetuity a reliable ongoing supply of clean drinking water. And as well, it will improve the firefighting capacity and decrease the fire risk for the Eagle Cliff residents. Blue Water as well has a significant capital upgrade on the horizon. I haven't included it in the financial plan because it's not as far down, it's not as far developed at this point as the one for Eagle Cliff is, but it is important to know that this upgrade is out there, and the people that live in Blue Water may be looking at some significant capital infrastructure improvement costs in the next few years. So we've had discussions with the LAC. We need to have further conversations and continue to consult with the community to discuss these upgrades. But there are 4 phases contemplated in this project, and that includes well upgrades to provide a reliable supply, water main upgrades, an upgrade to the reservoir for the storage capacity, and then a second round of water main upgrades to complete the project. The total estimated cost of this project is about $5 million. And again, if there are grant opportunities on the horizon, we will constantly be monitoring and looking out for those. And yeah, that's what we have for Blue Water. Council's strategic commitment C is responsibility. And under priority C5, Council has articulated that they wish to continue to implement approved plans and strategies. So there is going to be continued efforts to implement the parks plan, and that will include improvement of parks through enhanced maintenance. And some of the projects contemplated in the 2022 budget are work to improve King Edward Bay footbridges, our Buttes Point Road to Emily Lane staircase remediation project, and a replacement of a bridge in Mike's Lord Park. Other things related to the parks plan include starting to do work on shoreline protection and enhance marine species habitat. So some projects that are contemplated and included in the budget for 2022 include an improvement to the Bowen Bay beach access, starting to initiate work to do some shoreline protection at Tunstall Bay, and as well continuing to work on the Mannion Bay Information Buoy program, which is aimed at eelgrass protection. In total, there are $141,000 that has been included in the budget to advance parks projects that align with the island plan objectives. Under responsibility, priority C1, Council has indicated that advancement of the asset management plan is a priority for them. So there is budget allocation included in the strategic priorities section to advance the asset management plan. And it is really critical that we get baseline condition assessments of our asset inventory, such as these culverts and trunk road, And that will allow us to identify the highest priority projects. And from that, we intend to develop maintenance and replacement and funding strategies going forward. So in this budget, there's been $75,000 included this year and next year to advance the asset management plan, and $50,000 in each of 2024 through 2026. As well, we have put in a contribution from each of the, not each of the water systems, in total a $25,000 contribution from water systems to advance the asset management plan. We are providing in this financial plan funding to enable the next council to embark on an official community plan update. So we have put $50,000 in the budget, not in this year, but we put it in 2023, and then an additional $50,000 in 2024. So we're hoping we can kind of straddle that over 2 fiscal years. Under priority responsibility, priority C4, Council has articulated the desire to develop and implement plans that improve public safety. So in this financial plan, there is $100,000. It is grant funded. It comes from the Fire Smart program. But $100,000 has been set aside to provide opportunities for the community to strengthen wildfire preparedness. And that means that property owners can contact the fire chief, and they'll carry out assessments of the wildfire risk and provide educational awareness to property owners to help them understand and take measures to reduce the risk of wildfire on their property. We have included $25,000 that also is coming from that Fire Smart grant funding, and it's going to be used and is being used to develop a community wildfire resilience plan. There's $100,000 in the budget. It's based on the success of the grant application that was made, but that's in support of community wildfire preparedness and what's contemplated under that program if the grant is successful. That will carry out fuel treatment. So we'll seek out sources of wildfire fuel and try to eliminate those to reduce our wildfire risk, as well as money in that budget to acquire additional equipment to help with combating wildfires. So what is causing the property taxes to increase this year by 10.4% and next year estimated for 10.7%? The cost drivers are coming from operating expenses. And these are things like salaries and benefits and legal and professional fees and insurance and all of the fuel and supplies that we buy. It's coming from capital expenditures. So capital expenditures are the money that we spend on construction and major repairs and upgrades to our roads and infrastructure. And it's coming from debt. And debt carrying charges are the interest and the principal payments that we spend on borrowed money. So starting this year in 2022, we're going to be making interest and principal payments on several long-term loans. We have $2 million in the community lands purchase. We have $3 million that was approved to construct the fire hall, and we have $4 million that was approved to help with construction of the community center. So there are also a couple of short-term loans that are repayable. They must be repaid within 5 years. So this year we've done one for $640,000 to pay for the new fire truck that should be delivered this year. And there's also a proposal to take on additional debt financing to pay for our municipal share of the on-island compost. Long-term debt is at a fixed interest rate and fixed for the entire length of the loan. And short-term debt is variable, so it's subject to increased rates of interest over the next few years. 14% of this property tax increase is required to pay those debt servicing charges. 25% of the property tax increase is required to cover contributions to reserves that support our capital project expenditures. And 60% of the property tax increase is required to pay the cost of rising operating expenses. Some of our operating expenses are discretionary, We can reduce our expenses in professional development and training or communications. We could reduce maintenance expenses or grants to the community, but some of it is non-discretionary. So we do have a collective agreement with some of our outside workers. Those bargained contract provisions are not discretionary. Our insurance premiums are not discretionary. And to some extent, the amount that we spend on things like fuel and inputs to maintain our infrastructure roads are really not very discretionary. As well, we have our annual rent increases, again, not discretionary. It's often, communities like to compare themselves to other communities. How much are other communities increasing their property taxes by this year? So I just Googled and looked at a couple of cities. Vancouver's quite high this year at 6.35. Lions Bay, interesting, a community not unlike us. They have implemented a 6.5 for general operating this year. And for a couple of years now, they've had a 10% infrastructure charge because, like us, they are a member of Metro Vancouver. Being a member of Metro Vancouver municipality means there's many grant funding programs to support infrastructure that we are not eligible for because most of the gas tax funding and that kind of stuff goes in Metro Vancouver to support TransLink and transportation infrastructure, and it doesn't even come to the municipalities themselves to spend. So being a member of Metro Vancouver municipalities does put small communities like ours at another level of difficulty when we're trying to raise money for infrastructure. So it's interesting to see that Lions Bay has tried to address that challenge by adding a 10% infrastructure charge to their property taxes. Squamish is for 4.07. And yeah, so some other ones there. Then I'd like to also just have one more final word about parcel taxes. So we, for many years, had a garbage and recycling parcel tax and a parks parcel tax, and we did away with the parks parcel tax several years ago. We just had the garbage and recycling. So starting last year, Cove Bay implemented a parcel tax. Good Point and Eagle Cliff have actually had water utility parcel taxes for a very long time. So in those water districts, people have been used to paying a parcel tax for their water on top of the annual user fee. So Cove Bay has two. One is a 30-year debt for 130, and one is a 10-year debt for 142. That's for a typical homeowner. The parcel tax in Cove Bay is a little bit structured differently to allocate different amounts because they have different types of properties. They have multifamily properties and they have commercial properties. So they have different parcel taxes for the different types of uses of property. We have a new sewer parcel tax for 7 years, starting this year, that has been directed, council has directed me to impose that for 7 years at $664. Tunstall Bay has a new one for 5 years. They're doing a big capital upgrade on their reservoir this year. So non-connected properties will be paying $512 and connected properties paying $853. Good Point has that non-connected and connected rate. Non-connected is $210 and connected is $420. And Eagle Cliff is $400, whether you're connected or not. So it's important, I think, not to minimize the impact of parcel taxes on people's tax bill. They are becoming a bigger and bigger part of it. And last, for questions or for feedback, this is the link that you can follow to provide, to review the materials and to provide feedback within that, that forum. Or you could always email direct to Mayor and Council, or you could do snail mail to provide feedback at 981 Artisan Lane. And we would love to hear your thoughts on our budget material. That's it for me. Yeah, oh, sorry, I do have one more. I just did some background information on salaries and benefits. I was specifically looking at the cost of our payroll taxes. And what was really interesting to me was that in 2011, payroll taxes formed 16% overall of our salaries and benefits budget. And up in 2022, they are almost at 30% of our payroll costs. So those are from things like converting from MSP to employer health tax. That almost doubled the cost of our the cost for us to provide that benefit to staff. CPP now is increasing, but not only is the cost of CPP increasing, but the YMPE, so the minimum pension, the maximum pension earnings, we have to pay CPP premiums on a much higher percentage of salary. So there are unavoidable things that go along with salary expense that I also was just interested in doing a little bit of research on. So at the council meeting or the committee of the whole that we have scheduled for Monday, I'm going to be doing a little more analysis and research on some of our operating expenses and provide that information to council.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm happy to address any questions from the public or from council.
No, I got a whole list of stuff here that I'm just like, so you did a really good job, like dividing it up, and I even got some extra stuff that cleared in my head as well, so I appreciate it. And yeah, 10.4%, I mean, it's not a pretty picture, right? And it's
a really big number.
It's a big number, and I know what the stress is going to be like on people. It's I've never made more than $35 an hour, so I know what it's like to go across and back and have to pay this because it's going to be, what, $270 for the average household extra.
I just have that in my other.
I think it's around 270, 267 or something like that. But yeah, for a lot of people, that's an extra 2 days of work, and that's
287.
287. And we were the 7 there. And so I totally understand people's frustration at the cost. The flip side is, we have these just unexpected, like the sewer system that's going in on the road. I'm really thankful actually that we have the MEP in there, because otherwise we would have had to be all in on that construction. So at least we can double up with the multi-use pass, which is thankfully funded externally almost exclusively. So that's a good thing. But, going down the road, we're really a lot of these debt payments are gonna start eating, like you said, considerable part of our budget. And that's unsustainable. So I do agree, with some of the logic around trying to pay those debts off quick instead of letting them go, long term and just sort of pushing that ball down the road further, because it's something we need to address. And it's just an unusual amount of projects happening all at one time. So I mean, the good thing there is this will carry us through for a lot of the buildings for 50, 60 years. But the cost and all that's going to be felt really heavily right now. And then there's and I like the way that you rolled out also some of the non-discretionary, like increases in insurance rate, like even just the gasoline, I think was an extra 70 grand for the work shard. That's a 1.5% increase. Just on extra gas costs, right? So a lot of this is just, it is what it is, unfortunately, and there's not a lot of wiggle room here for us to bring the numbers down, although it's very high. So thanks for the presentation, and yeah, that's it for me.
And yeah, thanks for the presentation, Chris. Really good job. But I thought the Trunk Road stormwater issue is really an example of the kinds of things that can happen and shock us all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the asset management, you sort of talked about the asset management plan and putting some money aside to figure out the plan.
Mm-hmm.
I think explaining that a little bit, like what some of the potential liabilities are, when Patrick was talking to us about the number of culverts
Mm-hmm.
and the amount of money that's needed, we don't know the condition of any of them, but we know the condition of some, and they're deteriorating just like the Trunk Road. And it's an expensive business. So we have a lot of assets that we have to look after. And I think it's when you say asset management, it's sort of, okay, when there's that, But it's really critical because there's some potential bad surprises down the road.
Are there questions from the public?
Yeah.
I have a question actually. In the original PowerPoint presentation of the budget that was online, there was a negative figure for 2021 contributions to reserves. It was negative 1.730692. And then the positive contribution in 2022. Can you explain that? Is the 2021, is that the amount that's going to upgrade the sewer treatment plant? Or I think it was page 58 of your PowerPoint.
The one I just showed or the one I
Yeah,
showed?
the one's online.
Negative values in accounting mean,
I'm familiar with
Credits,
that,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
the way it looks is that, and maybe it requires further explanation, is that now in 2 years.
I have that presentation
Say
here, so if I just,
1,000.
I just wanna,
Kristen, it's Allison. I think maybe, is it the difference between we're putting less into reserves than we're taking out of them? And with that, so you've got a negative in the net change.
yeah, I'll just find it so I know exactly what.
Yeah.
But, there's also like reserve by reserve or in total, so, I'm sorry, can you just point me to what it was you were?
It was listed the 2022 contributions to reserves, which was 1.929392.
Oh, okay.
And then the 2021 contributions to reserves.
Yeah, it's a negative number just because I wanted to show the difference between the two. So the top number is the 2022 contribution contemplated, which is 1.9. And the difference between what the 2021 contribution was, which was 1.7. So the difference between the two, that's why I made it negative.
Okay, well, that's extremely confusing.
I'm sorry.
And what is the total of all the reserve funds currently?
Currently,
You talked about how much is being contributed, but I mean, I see your closing balances for the statutory reserves and non-statutory, which leads me to believe that it's something like 4 million total.
so general fund statutory reserves, there is a schedule that details those. And the opening balance in 2022, which would be the closing balance of 2021, the opening balance in 2022 is showing 3.7 million in general. And non-statutory reserves is showing 3.9. That number is still to deal with our closing fiscal 2021 year, which hasn't been finally signed off by the auditor yet. So I would say that that number is still being audited, but the statutory number is, I'm quite confident.
Can you just repeat the numbers?
3.9 for non-statutory
Non-statutory.
and 3.7 for statutory. Yeah.
One of the questions that I've been asked is regarding debt servicing limits. And with the 3 million far out and the 4 million for the community center and 2 million for community lands, how close does that bring us to the debt servicing limits that are established for municipalities?
The debt servicing limit is 75% of the prior year's open source revenues. So that those three together with the other, we have to also include the local service area borrowing. So we have to include the Tunstall Bay one. Those together bring us to about 48%, and the maximum is 75.
Is 75. So we are well within our debt servicing limits.
Are legally mandated, yeah.
How does that look? And I'm asking you a bit of a loaded question because you haven't been here in the position for that long, but how does it look historically going back
well, this is the first time we ever really had
Right.
debt.
Yeah.
We had $2 million in 2005, which we borrowed by referendum to purchase the community lands. We carried that for several years. We didn't have to roll it into long-term debt. We were quite fortunate. The MFA allowed us to just keep carrying it in short term, and we really benefited from that because when I first started here, we were paying about $70,000 a year in interest on that 2 million. And throughout the 2011, 2012, 13, interest rates really came down, and that interest savings was quite low. So we benefited by carrying it in, not locking it up. But 2 years ago, we weren't allowed to carry it out anymore, and we had to roll that into long-term debt. So we will have every long-term debt, it's amortized over a period. We're using 30 years right now, but they do come up like your mortgage every few years. So the long-term debt comes up after a 10-year period, and you have to renegotiate at the current interest rate at that time.
Okay, so do we have security on our interest rates for that chunk of time then?
For the long-term debt, so we don't yet, because the debt issue won't happen until October. So when I did this budget in April, the rates, the indicative rates is what the MFA calls it. The indicative rates were 3.71, but even since that time, they've now gone up to 3.85.
So that's a worry also.
So we need to roll that debt, we need to lock it down and reduce our exposure to interest rate risks. Because initially when we were doing the pro formas and we were contemplating for the community center, the rates were so low, we were looking at rates of 2.5%. Well, if you increase that if you double that rate to almost 4, your annual interest payment is going from $75,000 a year to $150,000 a year. And that it has such huge impacts. These little 1% changes in interest rates has such a big impact when you're talking debt of $4 million or $3 million. So we can't lock it down any earlier than October.
And sorry, just a quick follow. And we would be locked, like the 10-year is that standard?
Yeah, it's fixed. It's a debenture debt, and you make.
So it's not like your mortgage where you can do a 5-year or that
It's fixed for 10 years.
So if we go into 3.7, that will be it for 10 years. Okay, thanks.
Can I ask another question about the debt, given that we're on that subject?
Yeah.
Is the stuff on your PowerPoint indicated we're still financing $2 million of debt on the community lands?
That's a 30-year debenture debt. It was taken up.
So does that mean essentially all we've paid since 2005 is interest? We haven't touched the principal?
Yeah.
But then what happened to the community lands? There was the portion that was sold.
There are 2 portions sold. So one was sold in 2020 at the corner of Trump Road and Bowen Island and Miller Road. So those proceeds of that sale were used to finish the cost of constructing the Cope Bay water treatment plant. And that's why Cope Bay Water has 2 parcel taxes, because the users in Cope Bay are repaying that fund to the funds were deposited to something called the Land Opportunity Reserve Fund. So every time we sell a parcel, the funds have to go into that reserve fund. And then they were then borrowed to complete construction on the water treatment plant. So Cope Bay users are repaying those funds to the Land Opportunity Reserve Fund over 10 years. So they have 2 parcel taxes, one for 30-year and one for 10 to pay for the Cope Bay water treatment plant.
My recollection also was that we were required to move to a 10-year debt, and the sale of those 2 pieces of property came after we were required to make that move. So we didn't have, if I'm remembering correctly, we didn't have a window during which those funds could be applied to the $2 million.
Yeah, my understanding is that we can't repay the debt until after the 10
because
years.
it's locked down. Is that
Locked down.
So that's the time.
Yeah, the funds were in the reserve fund, they just be sitting there, so we.
And so that kind of makes more sense, because of course, when we voted in the referendum in 2005, the concept of this is a heck of a deal. We can sell the property and make money.
Yeah.
Although it didn't quite happen that way, but is the intention then, even though the money, that has been received for the sale of the 2 parcels, it is in reserves, that the next time the 10-year thing comes up, it's going to be applied to that, because we were certainly all promised in 2005 that was the whole point of it, is we wouldn't just be forking out money for a million years.
In fact, the charter requires that the proceeds of land sale be used to extinguish any debt that is associated with it.
Okay, good.
So the other one, and I didn't address your question about the other one, so the other one was sold to the health center on Miller Road Park, near where the fire hall is being built. And those proceeds were received just this year in 2021, fiscal year 2021, and they have been contributed to the Land Opportunity Reserve. And you'll see that on the audited financial statements when they come up.
So how much do we still have to pay on that $2 million? We
That's,
still have $2 million to pay? after
no,
the
it's
interest?
it's probably down to about 1.8 and a half after this year.
And so when will we be finished paying
It was taken out for a 30-year debenture. It renews after each 10-year
it?
cycle.
2005, so
We
2025.
only rolled it into we just carried it as like a short-term, like a line of credit almost, that we had $2,000 on. We just paid the interest on it from 2005 until 2019. For those 14 years, we just paid the interest on it. And then in 2019, it was rolled into 30-year debt. And now we're making interest and principal payments on it every year,
Just like a mortgage.
just like a mortgage, yeah. Yeah.
We are looking at, through the Mayor's Standing Committee on Community Lands uses for the other parts of the community lands, that some of which could be leased and some of which could be sold. So the call for expressions of interest for the property adjacent to Valterra could potentially be a lease, or it could be a sale of community lands and help offset cost.
And I mean, just to add to that, the fire hall site sits on those community lands as well. So that's a cost that we're bearing for that property, obviously. So that's, that's a big part of that as well, so.
And at those opportunities, when the 10-year periods come up, if we happen to be in a situation that we have cash, we can pay down for what we have. So in the 10 years, we'll take that money that we have collected from Hope Bay and any other additional parcels that subsequently get sold. We can extinguish what we can with that money and then just continue to carry. It's like a prepayment opportunity with each one of those 10-year renegotiating terms. Were there any questions from chat or?
I put a message out there, but no takers.
Kristen, it's Allison. So the debt, if we can also pay down the principal every 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we manage to sell enough community lands between now and 8 years from now, we can pay the whole thing off. Yeah. Thanks.
My question is, on the different, on your list, you have light industrial, 443% increase. Can you explain what that means and where is it? Because I didn't think we had light industrial.
Yeah, we have just that one little parcel that I didn't even know where it was. It was worth 188,000. And this year on the tax roll, a new property that's been given a classification of light industrial has shown up on our roll. So I'm really actually intrigued to look at it because we don't have light industrial. So it turns out that it is the distillery property in the Cove, and that property has been assessed with a value under the light industrial classification. And it is actually significant because under the property tax ratios, light industrial properties pay a significantly higher percentage of tax than the residential rate. And I do have some information on another slide in the other presentation that I did earlier. And it's in that citizen lab form that shows you what the impact is of that in light industrial classification that they pay. I think it was 4.16 times the residential rate.
So,
Yeah.
because originally a long time ago, when we were, became a municipality, it was agreed that there was no light industrial.
Oh,
So who has decided that it is light
These-
industrial? It's the assessment?
these classifications don't have anything to do with municipal zoning. So BC assessment works completely independent from what our council and our municipal zoning areas are. They look at use of the property is all they're looking at, and they have different criteria that they use to make that determination. It's all about how that property and that building are used, and that is what they use in their determination to say, oh, this is a light industrial property. They don't even consider the zoning associated with it.
Just a bit of clarification on that, because I was under the impression that we have the ability to set like a 4.16 and then one for business, one for residential. We do have that ability to change those formulas,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So this year, going into this budget, we're going with this formula.
That's completely up to
Unless
council,
we
yeah,
decide to
Yes.
move there.
correct.
Okay, good.
So how do we find out about those different classification that assessment is giving? Like I'm concerned about our neighboring property, the Salaries.
Mhm.
When is it going to be classified different as an industrial?
By BC assessment or
So
by
I'm just
council?
saying, is it going to be one day, is it going to be all of a sudden classified industrial and we have nothing to say about it?
It's not
That is
a,
really upsetting me.
it's not a changing in the zoning, it's just a change.
I know
in
it's
how-
not in the zoning, but if a BC assessment gives it that light industrial, then we neighbors are hooped.
No, you're required to follow the zoning regulations. It's it's municipal zoning that determines what you're allowed to use it for. BC assessment just kind of works independently from municipal regulations. It's about valuing the property for that type of property and how it's used, but it doesn't take into account those zoning,
And it wouldn't influence any council decisions on anything.
not at all.
Did you have another question? Can I
Yes, I
respond?
have another comment. So that comes back to your general reserve funds, and I'm absolutely confused about it.
Okay.
And I'm very concerned about the use of the general reserve funds for the private use of the Snook Cove wastewater treatment plant. That serves as a very limited number of years. One has to point out that the 2011 contribution to the reserve funds was meant to be paid back by the beneficiary of those funds, and it was not. So for us, it is a very poor precedent that cannot be reproduced. And I stress, cannot be reproduced. To me, the general reserve funds are there for public use only and not for geographically small areas. So that is my major concern, because at another time, I will give you the history of how I see the Snook Cove wastewater treatment plant, which really has been paid by the public more than once.
And because there's an overwhelming number of letters included in the agenda from last Monday's meeting after at the end of the meeting. I didn't see one of those letters that said anything other than what Anne has just said. And there seemed, are we just getting zero feedback until May the 2nd meeting when council either keeps that provision in the budget or says, no, that's not acceptable?
Council will take all of the feedback that it receives into consideration. They will deliberate on the feedback that they've received, and they will provide direction to staff to maintain the funding plan as it is, or they will provide direction to staff to change it. I can't really begin to contemplate what council will decide to do, but
So I have a question regarding that plan. When did it become the responsibility of the municipality?
on incorporation.
In 2000.
Yeah, it was one of the assets that was transferred over in the letters patent.
So it was taken over from Metro Vancouver?
Correct.
I can ask another question about leading on the whole light industrial and the businesses, and the concept of taxing them differently than residential. And I guess it's the same kind of question as obviously you answered the light industrial question, that's up to the assessment authority, but if the council decided to levy a different rate of taxes for businesses as opposed to residential, how is the determination of what is a business property made in that kind of case?
Again, BC Assessment has a certain set of criteria that they use to assign a business component. There are very few that are 100% business. Most of them actually have a couple of different classifications. The role is a public document, and you can go and look at it, and all of the classifications are right there. So it's interesting to kind of find the section on most of the properties that are down Trunk Road, and you can see how they're classified. Often they have a residential component to them and a business component to them. Yeah.
And now, I don't know if you can answer this question because you're on the municipal side, not the assessment authority side, but who gives this information to the assessment authority that, you know, a business is opened up here and then they go and look at it, or do they just figure that out, or do they?
They send assessment surveyors, I guess is what they're called, or assessment agents over. They respond to inquiries, they respond to information provided to them from the municipality. They look at our building permits. We send them all of our building permit information quarterly, and they use all of that information. So they get it from a bunch of different sources, but I mean, certainly sometimes people pick up the phone and say, because anybody can question an assessment for any property.
Oh, I know, we've done that, and they're actually, in terms of bureaucracies, they're very receptive.
Yeah.
Have a problem, you know. Okay.
Our business license with central store.
I don't know. That's a really good question. I'll have to check with Tess about that.
Thank you.
Just a follow-up part, Chris. So if we decided, let's say to switch the formula a bit, and we went from a higher rate, let's say for business, would it take significant staff resources for us then to start figuring out this, or is that BC Assessment, they're gonna deal with all of that, we don't have to?
No, the properties are assigned their classifications. We assign, council assigns a ratio. They assign a rate, and the rate is established as the residential rate. And then council says, okay, if the residential rate is 1, then light industrial will pay 4.2, or businesses will pay 3.6. Like they pay as a proportion of the residential rate. So that is.
So there wouldn't be significant time spent on us trying to figure out what proportion is residential, business, all that kind of stuff. Okay, thank you.
That's all assigned by the assessment.
The important point that you made at your last presentation was that residential and business on Bowen are charged at the same rate, and that there are only two other municipalities.
One
other municipality in the province that has that same
One
rate for business and residential, and Anwar basically has no business base whatsoever. So I'm not surprised that they're the other one.
Yeah, and what was that, what's the average ratio that most municipalities are, I know there's some variability. I thought it was a 1-to-2 ratio or something all across, but I'm not.
I don't know what the average would be, but I mean, they're all over the map. So I had a slide in my other presentation that showed, sorry, that's municipal rates. Oh, yeah, no, business another. So Belcarro was 2.4 times the residential rate, and yeah, Euclid was 3.4, and then 2.75. So
Actually, so higher, more like 3. Okay.
yeah,
That's pretty.
the highest I saw
It's a huge
was,
difference, you know?
yeah, and I just picked 10 kind of
Yeah.
either remote or and I chose them. The communities I chose were Enmore, Belcarro, Bowen Island, obviously, because we're all in the Metro Vancouver, smaller ones. I picked Lions Bay, I picked Gibson's, I picked Hope, Powell River, I picked Roslyn, Sechelt, and Euclid as my sample group. And I just thought that would be a little bit representative.
Vancouver's insane, it's like 6-to-1 or something, but what also keeps businesses there is they assess the taxes based on the highest and best use, as opposed to what's sitting there now. So if you build a 23-story apartment building, you pay tax on that as opposed to the convenience store, so. I've got one more question if nobody else does.
Yeah.
The development revenue, 2022 figure in your budget was 367,353 and estimated for 2023, 343,800. Is that just the income from building permits?
Building permits, temporary use permits, variance permits, there's all a whole series of permits that.
And where are we at with actually assessing development cost charges in some kind of a meaningful way to deal with some of these infrastructure issues that benefit developers, but they seem to have slithered out from paying them for as long as I've ever been around. I know my husband and I have been writing letters to council ever since we moved over here.
Yeah,
In 1991, about when are the developers going to pay their share of
Yeah.
fixing the roads. And I mean, we see the whole infrastructure thing.
Yeah.
Is that an A1 priority of council?
I didn't see it in council's island plan for 2022. It has been something that has made it in and kind of fallen off a bit, but I believe that with the latest events, we've seen how the infrastructure is really starting to fail. That I think that it's a priority that is gotta be put higher on the agenda. That's work that we will do if directed.
There have been contributions though from larger developments to infrastructure projects like the water treatment plant, for example.
Yeah, you're right.
So they haven't all.
Not completely, but it's.
Yeah. No, I get your point. About a year and a half, 2 years or so ago, there was work done on this that I think in part stalled because with no major new development project on the horizon. And a lot of that, the permit money is coming from small projects. Is it not?
There are a couple of larger developments, certainly on the west side. There's Arcus Ridge, and there are, and you're right, Councillor Nicholson, as part of the signing off on the subdivision or coming to the agreement, there are always amenity contributions of some sort. So for example, the Arbutus Ridge one had significant community center contributions as part of their amenity contribution. So I guess there's kind of pluses and minuses. If you don't articulate them within a DCC bylaw, you can capture them at the time to address the pressing needs that may be facing your municipality at that time. Whereas if they're already articulated, I don't know what the best method is, but certainly most municipalities have very structured DCCs to support their infrastructure, so.
It's my impression over the years is an awful lot of the amenities that have been offered and provided by developers is trails, parkland, common space, green space. And some people have suggested, and I wouldn't say I disagree with them, that the larger amount of that space tends to be space that isn't terribly buildable, that isn't terribly attractive from a real estate point of view. So you cluster your houses, you sell them for a premium rate, and all the awkward and not terribly useful land to build on, we just give to, they turn over to the municipality, and the municipality to pay the cost of upkeep for perpetuity. So there's the amenity,
Well,
an amenity where they're handing over cold hard cash or building a sewage treatment plant or that, or contributing to the community center. That's a real amenity.
but part of the other cost that comes along with, as you mentioned, trails, I mean, think of the Cape Roger Curtis Seawalk Trail. The maintenance costs that we're going to be looking at to maintain that over its lifetime are going to be quite significant. So with every gift and every contribution comes a long list of future liabilities associated with it too. So
That was a very challenging, it was absolutely true. But I do have a question regarding parks. When, again, I'm very confused about parks. Cape Project Curtis, when those 3 lots were given to the Conservancy, does the municipality collect taxes in perpetuity on those 3 lots that have been turned into park?
that's a good question. I believe they will be exempt. Do you know that?
That they're being taxed at a different rate, rather than taxed at the rate of
Then the
residential area.
Vermont, it's taxed as a park tax, is it park tax?
Yes, went through that. I think for last year, probably they hadn't made the change, but it would be for this year if
I'll find
I got
out.
that correct.
And I'll
So
put it into the Citizen Lab so everyone can.
I don't
benefit from
watch
that
the
information.
Citizen Lab.
I'll let you know as well. Yeah, that's a good question.
I have, I cite some of my see a lot of stuff. So which means that, okay, let's go back. We have all kinds of little parks all over the island. Some of them are minuscule, some of them are a little bit bigger. So for example, in our subdivision, like Margaret said, there was a very small area that could not be developed because it was minimum 5 acres at the time. The zoning was minimum 5 acres. That lot was 2 acres, so it was given as a park. So is this little park being taxed? It's part of the municipality, it's a municipal park, so
We don't tax our own land.
no, you don't tax your own land, but you will tax the Conservancy.
I don't know the answer to your question. I would think that it would be taxable, but like I said, I don't know for sure. So I will find out and I'll let you know.
Because it's used by the public. The idea is to have the public use it.
Like Crippen Park is not,
Griffin Park is not taxed.
not by, no, property value taxes.
And I can't tell you what the result was, but I know they did the work to reduce the taxes from the residential to whatever would be appropriate, whether it's 0 or a different rate, I can't remember.
When they purchased the land, and this is my recollection, and Kristen will confirm it. When they purchased the land, they did have to pay taxes
Yeah.
initially.
Yeah, I remember there was a tax
Yeah.
problem, that's why I'm
And
asking.
they missed a deadline for applying for tax relief, but they did apply for tax relief. And I believe that relief was granted.
So now, let's say, coming back to Cape Project Curtis, the development at the present moment, some of the lots have not been sold, they are taxed.
Yes.
If they turn them to the municipality because they cannot sell them, what happens to their houses? That's what, again, it's part of the same question.
Yeah, municipal owned land is not tax. It wouldn't make sense for us to raise taxes and then pay ourselves. If they're not.
That makes sense, but at that time, something happened. Because it belongs to the service. So, private or?
I'll find out.
Okay. Well, thanks, that's great.
We still have 50 more minutes if there's any questions.
That assessment role that you were talking about with the industrial and all that is, now I'm familiar with the assessment authority thing online. Is it part of that, or is it something that is viewable through the municipality? Or can you put that information on the citizen web thing or on the website or something so that those of us who are interested.
Where to go in and find it? Yeah, I sure can. Yeah. Okay, so
Salaries have a question? I can see here.
Alex, did you hear that?
No, I'm just here to watch and answer questions if there was any that needed from history or things we'd done. And I know we had a bit of a discussion when the Conservancy was buying the property about, because I think we've got a conservation covenant registered on it that we're the holders of, which I think will reduce the assessed value down to a very nominal amount. But I have not gone and looked at what their 2021 assessment notice, the one they just would have received in January, what it said. So.
Thank you, Alison.
Yeah.
Alex, do you have any questions?
Not tonight, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for attending, Alex.
Yeah, for sure. I'll see you all on Monday in person.
Thank you.
I think we're done, yeah.
well, thank you everyone for coming, and please put your feedback in the Citizen Lab or email Mayor and Council or email me, and any questions, I'm always happy to address them. Thank you.